Hello, dear Lana. Welcome to your favorite program, The Knowledge Quest. Time for History and Government. I'm your favorite teacher, Mr. Alex Obara, and welcome. Today we shall be discussing a rather interesting topic about the people of Kenya up to the 19th century. The people of Kenya up to the 19th century. The people of Kenya up to the 19th century. Question that you'll want to ask themselves: what or where did Kenyans come from? We have so many tribes in Kenya, up to a minimum of 43 tribes in Kenya. So the question could be, where did these all tribes come from? Who are the original inhabitants of Kenya? Did it happen like Kenyans, all the tribes which are in Kenya just found themselves in Kenya? Or something probably might have happened that we have all the tribes we have in Kenya? I'd like to educate you a bit about the origin of people of Kenya up to the 19th century. Then we shall be able to understand what is the origin of the Kenyan people. Where did they come from? Why do we have so many tribes in Kenya, 43? Why do we have different languages in Kenya? So that is a question which we shall be able to answer by the end of our lesson. So I want you to know that Africa happens archaeologically. In history, we have what you call archaeology, whereby we are trying to dig the history and using the history of the remains of human activities. And through the remains of human activities and human tools, we have had immense evidence which confirms to us that Africa is the cradle land of humankind. When you talk about the cradle land, it means that probably all human beings could have originated. The cradle land, all human beings could have originated from Africa. They could have originated. So the original homeland of all human beings historically is Africa. But now, is there evidence showing that there were human beings living in Kenya before the 19th century? According to archaeological evidence, the people called the Khoisan, the original inhabitants of Kenya, according to archaeological evidence. I said when we talk about archaeology, we are using the remains of human activities and remains of human tools and all that. So according to archaeology, the original inhabitants of Kenya before the 19th century happened to be the Khoisan. So I want you to understand these, that the original inhabitants of Kenya before the 19th century are the Khoisan. So that basically gives you information that the original inhabitants of Kenya are not Kisis. They are not Luos, they are not Kikuyus or Kambas or any other tribe, but the Khoisan happen to be the original and earliest inhabitants of Kenya. These Khoisan had similar characteristics with the Khoikhoi and the San of South Africa. If you heard of the Khoikhoi and the San of South Africa, so it's believed that the Khoisan had got similar characteristics. Actually, from the research archaeologically, they might have the same characteristics with the Khoikhoi and the San of South Africa. And they also had what you call a language which was similar. And the language which the Khoikhoi and the San speak in South Africa has a clicking sound. So these Khoisan guys, or these Khoisan people who are the earliest inhabitants of Kenya, spoke with a language which was sounding like click. So it is a clicking, produced clicking sound. So probably you could have been at a position to watch some movies whereby you've seen the Khoikhoi or the San of South Africa involved. When they speak like they are clicking. So the Khoisan, in that essence, were also speaking in that essence. Probably would like to know what were the cultural aspects of the Khoisan, who happen to be the original or earliest inhabitants of Kenya. Now, what you want to know in a quick way is the cultural aspects of the Khoisan before we get to know how these other tribes came into Kenya. So we'll look at the cultural aspects. Cultural aspects of the Khoisan. So the first one we'll talk about, of course, when we talk about culture, we are referring to the total way of life, how they lived totally when we talk about economically, politically, and socially. So the cultural aspects of the Khoisan, number one, the language which they spoke had a click sound. So we say, spoke language with a click sound. They spoke a language with a click sound. That is the first cultural aspect. So we say they sounded like the Khoikhoi and the San of South Africa. Point two, they were nomadic. They happened to be nomads. So this means that they kept livestock and they moved from one place to another in search probably of water and pasture for their livestock. They never settled at one given place. So we say they were nomads. Number three, they gathered fruit and wild, in that case, wild fruits. So we say they were gatherers. Yeah? Example, we talk about fruits, tubers, and all that kind of food which they gather. So we say they were gatherers. In essence, they gathered fruits, they gathered tubers, and of course, as their food. In another way, they used stones, bows, and arrows. Yeah? They used stones, bows, and arrows. So you could ask why how they use them. Stones probably could be used to dig out the arrow roots. They could use these stones to dig out the roots which they used as food. And of course, the bows and the arrows could be used in hunting, probably in taking care of selves and defending themselves from their enemies. Also, they carried out fishing. And the method of fishing which was used, they used what we call harpoons. Now, harpoons was long sticks which were sharp. And these are sticks which they could actually throw like a spear-like and hit the fish in the water. So we say they did fishing by using harpoons. They also made use of rocks by making shelters and caves. So they stayed in rocks and caves. Yeah? So they could take shelter themselves in rock shelters and caves. And also, another cultural aspect about the Khoisan, in this case, is that they buried, they're dead. So, they buried, they're dead. That is a cultural aspect which actually has been passed down through ages. Then also, they made and used pottery. So those are examples of the cultural aspects of the Khoisan. So they made pottery and used. So these are just among the many cultural aspects of the Khoisan. Now, a question could be, where did the Khoisan people go? Do we still have them in Kenya? Do we still have people called the Khoisan in Kenya? This is what we could say, that this, once we had other language groups migrating into Kenya, as we shall see in a short while, they were able to be subdued. In other words, they could have been absorbed, assimilated, or they were chased out of Kenya, and some could have run back to South Africa. So therefore, when we had other language groups which were more powerful than the Khoisan coming, they replaced them, they subdued them. And therefore, we realized that now we had the Khoisan running away. However, we have some remaining traces, or we can say we have some existing remnants of the Khoisan in Kenya. So I want you to learn today, I know today, that not all, we have some remnants of the Khoisan in Kenya. And which are these remnants? Now, if you go to Kalenjin land, we have the language group or the people they call the Okiek. So among the Kalenjins, the Okiek happen to be a remainder or a remnant of the Khoisan among the Kalenjin. Among the Maasai, so this is among the Kalenjin, we have Okiek. Among the Maasai, we have a remnant of the Khoisan called Dorobo. So this is among the Maasai. And in Western Kenya, we have the remnants of the Khoisan. In this case, they are called Onguye and Okuro. Interesting names there. Onguye, and Okuro. So these ones happen to be remnants of the Khoisan in Western Kenya. The Western Kenya. So basically, that is a brief introduction on the original inhabitants of Kenya who lived before actually the 19th century. Now, we will move, and I want you to understand that now, this being the original, other language groups eventually migrated into Kenya, subduing, assimilating, and pushing the Khoisan out of Kenya. And we shall look at those language groups in a short while. Now, when we were studying about the sources of information on history and government, we came across a source called linguistics. And we said linguistics is the scientific study of language. Now, look at this. We discussed and talked about linguistics. And we say this is the scientific study of language. The question could be, now, how many language groups do we have in Kenya? Basically, by using language, we can understand the history of Kenyans. And in that regard, we'll talk about the three main language groups found in Kenya by source of linguistics. So we have a language group we call the Bantus. We have a language group we call the Nilotes. And we have the Kushites. Of course, we have also one called the Semites, but we shall mainly venture on the three main language groups in Kenya. We also have, of course, Asians and Europeans as other language groups in Kenya, but we won't majorly into that. We'll look into these ones. So we talk about the Bantus, the Nilotes, and the Kushites. Now, these are language groups which migrated into Kenya. They are not the original inhabitants of Kenya. They migrated into Kenya from their original homeland. And in a little while, we shall know the reasons why they migrated. We shall also discover which was their original homeland and what were some of the effects of their migration into Kenya. Now, we'll start with the Kushites. We shall start with the Kushites and we shall see how they came into Kenya. So, let us write down about the Kushites and say something about them. The Kushites. So one thing about I want us to understand about the Kushites is that they exist in two different groups or two distinct groups of Kushites. The first one, we call them the Southern Kushites. So the first group of the Kushites are Southern Kushites. And the second group of the Kushites are referred to as the Eastern Kushites. So those are the two main distinct groups of the Kushites. Let us start by the Southern Kushites. We'll start with the Southern Kushites. Now, we don't have much historical information about the Kushites, but we shall give the scant information which is available about the Kushites. Number one, it's believed that they entered Kenya through the northern Kenya. So they came into Kenya through the north, entered Kenya through the northern part of Kenya. That's the first point. And then they might have originated from Ethiopian highlands. So their original homeland could be, according to history and the research, is that they came from Ethiopian highlands. Ethiopian highlands. And they were also pastoralists. Now, because it is believed that they were pastoralists, probably the main reason why they came into Kenya, they were searching for pasture and water for their animals. So the main reason why the Kushites could have left Ethiopian highlands to come into Kenya is because they were pastoralists and they might have been looking for water and pasture for their animals. So that's very important for you to note that the main reason for the migration of the southern Kushites from the Ethiopian highlands is because they were looking for water and pasture for their animals. So up to around 2,500 to 3,000 years ago, they were already occupying the grasslands of Kenya, cultivating crops like sorghum, millet, and rearing animals which were horned and humpless. So they had occupied Kenya up to around 2,500 to 3,000 years ago. They even extended up to Tanzania. So those southern Kushites, which we have in Tanzania, and this is very important because it confuses a lot of students. So I want you to understand that we have southern Kushites in Tanzania, and we have remainders, or I can say remnants, of southern Kushites in Kenya. Now let's look at the Kushites in Tanzania. The Kushites in Tanzania, we have the Iraqi. Don't confuse, these are found in Tanzania. We have the Boni in Tanzania, and then we have the Burungi. All these are found in Tanzania. So as they migrated, they entered Kenya and even extended to some parts of Tanzania. So the southern Kushites found in Tanzania include the Iraqi, the Boni, and the Burungi. Then when it comes to Kenya, we have two remaining groups of southern Kushites. So in Kenya, we only have two. We have the Dahalo and the Sanye. You have the Dahalo and the Sanye, and those occupy the lower part of Tana River. So they occupy the lower parts of Tana River, and these are the remaining. They are the remaining groups of the southern Kushites in Kenya. Some were absorbed probably by the incoming groups. So the only remnant or the only remaining southern Kushites in Kenya are the Dahalo and the Sanye. Very confusing to most students. So don't confuse between those in Tanzania and those in Kenya. In Kenya, we have the Dahalo and the Sanye occupying the lower Tana River. And the Tanzania, we have the Iraqi, Boni, and the Burungi. So that's all the information which you can talk about the southern Kushites. So like I said, the history about the Kushites is a bit scanty, but I talk about the eastern Kushites. So let us immediately move to the eastern Kushites. Let us immediately discuss now about the eastern Kushites. Now, the eastern Kushites in Kenya include the following. We have the Borana as the first language group which belongs to the eastern Kushites. We have the Somali, not Somalia, but Somali as a language group. We have Oromo. Then we have Gabra. We have Rendile. and we have the Burji. Right, so these are the Eastern Kushites. These are the language groups which belong to the Eastern Kushites. Number one, we have the Borana, the Somali, the Oromo, the Gabra, Rendile, and the Burji. But for the Southern Kushites in Kenya, we only have two. Don't confuse Sanye and Dahalo. But for the Eastern Kushites, we have Borana, Somali, Oromo, Gabra, Rendile, and Burji. Now, they originated from Ethiopia or Somalia. Yeah, so their original homeland could be Ethiopia or Somalia. Ethiopia or Somalia. And then they moved and settled into Kenya around between 2,000 and 1,000 years ago. Question could be, why could they have moved out of Somalia or Ethiopia into Kenya? So therefore, we'll look at the reasons for the migration of the Eastern Kushites into Kenya. Reasons for their migration into Kenya. Reasons for their migration into Kenya. So what were the reasons for the migration of the Eastern Kushites into Kenya? The first reason, they were escaping from clan or family feuds. Escaping from clan or family. So when we talk about feuds, these are just disagreements and fights within the clan and the community at large. So probably one of the reasons why they were running away from Somalia or Ethiopia into Kenya, they were escaping from clan or family feuds. Whenever there are disagreements, those who don't like will always run away from those disagreements. So because of that, they ran and found, of course, a refuge or a place to stay in Kenya. Number two, there was population pressure in their area of origin. There was population pressure in the area of origin. You realize that as they came into Kenya, or probably one of the reasons why they came is because there was population pressure. And like we said, when there is population pressure and we don't have enough food resources or enough space for them to dwell in. Therefore, they decided actually to move out of their original homeland into Kenya. So we say they were looking for a space to settle their surplus population, or we can say their population which had grown. Number three, they were searching for better grazing lands. For better grazing. Now, you and I will know that most of the larger bit of the Kushites are pastoralists in nature, or by the practice, the economic activity, one of them is being pastoralists. So therefore, one of the reasons why they might have migrated from their original homeland into Kenya is because they were searching for better grazing lands, and also we can say for water for their animals in that essence. So that is the first, another point why they came. Number four, they were fleeing. To flee is to run away from. So they were fleeing from outbreak of diseases. Outbreak of diseases. And these are diseases which actually affected both human beings and animals. So these are diseases on human beings and animals. So we say that they were running away or escaping from diseases which affected both human beings, and animals. So therefore, they wanted to find a place whereby these diseases could not attack their animals and, of course, the people in that essence. And then the next point, we say that they were escaping from famine and drought. Yeah, they were escaping from famine and drought. Of course, famine and drought, we realize that where there's famine and where there's drought, people cannot live because there is no food for both human beings and animals. So, therefore, probably another reason why they were running away from their original homeland is because of famine and drought. Now, we have a short break, and when we come back, we shall look at the reasons eventually and then try to look at specific tribes within the Kushites and how and why they migrated to Kenya. Keep tuned. See you shortly. Hello, dear viewer, and welcome back to your favorite program, The Knowledge Quest. History and government is our subject, and I'm your teacher, Mr. Alex Obara. So we'll continue with what we were discussing about the people of Kenya up to the 19th century. Now, we have discussed about the original inhabitants, and we've realized that the original, the earliest inhabitants of Kenya were the Khoisan, who are likely to be the same like the Khoisan, and the San of South Africa. So the language groups which we have in Kenya, the largest language, that is Bantu, the Nilotes, and the Kushites, might have. Actually, it is out of research, they migrated into Kenya out of the original homeland. So we started by the first language group, the Kushites, and we said they're divided into two. We have the Eastern Kushites and the Southern Kushites. The Southern Kushites, we said we don't have much history, it's scanty. However, we have two remaining language groups or tribes that belong to the Southern Kushites, that is the Sanye and the Dahalo. So we want to continue with the Eastern Kushites. We classify them, the Oromo, the Gara, the Gabra, Rendile, and the Burji. All those belong to the Eastern Kushites. So we were discussing about the reasons for their migration. And like we saw, the first reason is that they were escaping from clan and family feuds, disagreements in family and in the clan. Number two, there was population pressure in their area of origin. That is where they came from. Population increased. So therefore, they were looking for where they could be able to take their surplus population. Then number three, they were searching for better grazing lands. Being pastoralists, therefore, they kept livestock. They could find better grazing land. Number four, they were fleeing. We said fleeing means running away from outbreak of diseases which attacked both human beings and animals. So the diseases they are running from, they were finding a place that was disease-free. Then the fifth one, we said they were escaping from famine and drought. And we said where there's famine and drought, we don't have food. So the animals and human beings could not survive in an area without food. So the next reason why they migrated into Kenya, that is number six. Number six as the reason for migration into Kenya. They were fleeing or running away from constant attacks from the Somali. So number six, they fled from constant attacks from their neighbors such as the Somali. So basically, the neighbors were disturbing They were attacking them constantly. Of course, you know the reason why they were attacking them was to steal and to raid animals from them. So because of that reason, they fled those constant attacks, which were continuous. They were continuously being attacked by the Somali. Therefore, they decided to run away so as to find a place that there were no attacks. And lastly, but not least, they migrated to satisfy the spirit of adventure. So when talk about the spirit of adventure, is that they loved walking. They were just migrating to satisfy the desire to explore new areas and, of course, discover new things in areas. So that spirit of adventure is or could be one of the reasons why they migrated and came eventually settled in Kenya. Now, those are the 7 reasons which you can classify as the reasons why the Eastern Kushites migrated from their original homeland to Kenya. So today you've known that the Eastern Kushites are not original inhabitants. They actually migrated into Kenya. Now, I will quickly take you through 2 or 3 language tribes, and we shall see, discuss a bit about them and see how they came into Kenya, those that belong to the Kushites. And the first one we shall begin with are the Oromo. We'll discuss briefly about the Oromo. We'll discuss briefly about the Oromo. So the first thing that you'll know about the Oromo is that they came in the 16th century from Ethiopia. They came in the 16th century from Ethiopia. So the first thing, they settled in Kenya in the 16th century. That is, they came from Ethiopia. So their original homeland is Ethiopia, and they occupied Kenya in the 16th century. Initially, when they came, they settled on the eastern shore of Lake Turkana. So when they came, they occupied the eastern shore of Lake Turkana. They later moved and south, pushing the Mijikenda and the Pokomo out of Shungwaya. So after occupying Turkana for some time, they moved south. So from Turkana, they moved southwards and they came to Shungwaya. So after coming to a place called Shungwaya, they pushed out those guys who had already occupied Shungwaya, that is the Pokomo and the Mijikenda. So the Mijikenda, we shall discuss about them in a later stage. The Mijikenda and the Pokomo were occupying Shungwaya. So when the Eastern Kushites moved from the from the eastern shores of Lake Turkana, they moved southwards, came to Shungwaya, and they pushed the Mijikenda and the Pokomo, that's the Oromo. So after pushing them, they pushed the Mijikenda to occupy a place like Malindi and Kilifi. So the Mijikenda were pushed from Shungwaya and they occupied areas like Kilifi and Malindi. So after being pushed from Shungwaya, today the Oromo occupy the southern part of Tana River. So today, presently, the Oromo occupy the southern part of Tana River. So southern part of Tana River. So that is where, if you go today, even right now, you'll find the Oromo occupying those areas, and they're neighbors to the Pokomo. So these are Oromos, they are neighbors to the Pokomo. So that tells you that really it is true they pushed the Pokomo from Shungwaya. So they are neighbors in the southern part of Tana River. Now, after looking at that brief, that they occupied Kenya, 16th century, the original homeland being Ethiopia, they first occupied the eastern part or shores of Lake Turkana, then moved southwards to Shungwaya, where they pushed out the Mijikenda and the Pokomo. So the Mijikenda occupied Kilifi and Malindi. And today, the Oromo occupy the southern part of Tana River, where they are neighboring with the Pokomo. Question: what were the effects of the migration and settlement of the Oromo? So we'll discuss, that takes us to our next discussion, the effects of migration and settlement of the Oromo. Effects of migration and settlement of the Oromo. So what are the effects? The effects are results. The results, the aftermath. So we're discussing about the aftermath. What happened immediately or after they had occupied? What were the results, or what was the aftermath of the occupation of the Oromo after migrating into Kenya? So the first one, there was intermarriage. So we say the first effect of the migration of the Oromo into Kenya is intermarriage. They intermarried. They intermarried with the people that they came into contact with. For example, they intermarried with the Somali, the Pokomo, and of course, they also intermarried with the Mijikenda, or we can say the Borana in that case. Let us say the Borana. So when they came into contact, the Oromo came into contact, these guys, or these people here, the Somali, the Pokomo, and the Borana, they intermarried. Number two, their coming or their migration into the present led to expansion of trade. So we say there was expansion of trade, that is, and of course, the method of trade which was used by that time was barter trade. So they were exchanging whatever goods that they had, and in this case, they were livestock farmers. They exchanged with their neighbors who probably were crop farmers. So there was expansion of trade by exchanging commodities with their neighbors that they interacted with. Then, of course, we also have number three, there was increase in conflicts. Increase in conflicts. So when you talk about conflicts, these are disagreements between communities over resources. So there was conflicts with them and other communities over resources. For example, talk about pasture and water. So the conflict was over resources like pasture and water. So those watering points, there were disagreements because actually, like we said, these guys or these people, the Oromo, they were pastoralists. So by coming and occupying those areas, there were disagreements on who should feed the animals where, on who should take the animals to drink water at what point. So that led to conflicts between their neighbors. And then, of course, there was displacement and redistribution of the people. Displacement and redistribution of people. So, like we said, once they came and occupied those areas, they usually moved southwards from Lake Turkana, and they went to areas of Shungwaya. And after coming to Shungwaya, they found communities living there. And we said they found the Pokomo and they found the Mijikenda. So they pushed them, that is displacement, by taking the areas that they were initially occupying. So the areas where the Mijikenda and the Pokomo were occupying were now occupied by the Oromo. So that is displacement. And redistribution is whereby now the population was spread out to other areas. So that is redistribution of the people. So that actually is another effect, displacement and redistribution of people from the areas of settlement. And then we also have a cultural exchange. There was cultural exchange as another effect. Exchange in culture. So human beings, of course, interact, and like we said, culture is a way of life. So there's some way of life which they were able actually to pass to their neighbors. For example, their neighboring communities adopted Islam. The Oromo being Islams, they were able to pass that culture of Islam. Okay, they were able to pass the culture of Islam to their neighbors. So there is cultural exchange, plus many more aspects which the Southern Kushites actually got from their neighbors, and also they passed on. Then we'll look at the next point is that settlement in high agricultural potential areas encouraged them to practice crop farming. So they started to practice crop farming. They adopted crop. Yeah, like we said, these guys or these people were actually pastoralists. Their nature or their economic activity, the main economic activity, the major economic activity was pastoralism. But by the fact that they came and occupied rivers that were rich, of course there was water and there was fertile soil. Therefore they adopted crop farming activity, which was not part of their lifestyle economically. And lastly, expansion of agriculture due to demand of agriculture produce. So there was expansion of agriculture as the last effect. Led to expansion of agriculture. Yeah, so expansion of agriculture because there was demand, there was need of more food produce. So that meant that the products now could only be found through agriculture, and that meant an expansion in agriculture. So these are the effects of the migration and settlement of the Oromo in the original, in their area of settlement. So the first one, intermarriage. They intermarried with their neighbors. We said like Somali, Pokomo, and Borana. The first one. Number two, there was expansion of trade between them and their neighbors. Number three, there was increase in conflicts, that is, over pasture in water. Number four, we say displacement and redistribution. In this case, they displaced people from Shungwaya, that is, the Mijikenda and the Pokomo were displaced, and there was redistribution of the people. Number five, there was exchange of culture, and we said culture is the way of life. Now in this case, they passed, for example, their culture of Islam to their neighbors. So their neighbors were able to become Islams. Then we have number six, they adopted crop farming. We say this was possible because they occupied the river valleys, which were rich in fertility. The soil was rich, and of course there was availability of water for the crops. And then lastly, there was expansion of agriculture. Why? Because there was demand for food, and that meant that agriculture could flourish. So these are the effects or the results or the outcome of the migration and settlement of the Oromo in their current area. So that's all we can say about the Oromo. The next one which we shall briefly look into is the Borana. Briefly, we shall look at the Borana. Remember the reasons for their migration and settlement, they're the same, what we discussed at the early point. So we look at the Borana. The Borana. Now the Borana, they are Pokomo, Oromo speaking people. So they speak Oromo language. They are Oromo speaking people, and their area of origin is southern Ethiopia. So they speak Oromo, first point. The second one, their area of origin is in southern Ethiopia. southern Ethiopia. And their main reason why they migrated into Kenya, they were escaping Menelik wars. So the reason for migration, main reason for migration. So their leader was called Menelik. Also, they were escaping Menelik wars. Escaping Menelik wars of conquest. That is, these are wars which happened actually in 1897. So by the year 1897, these guys escaped into Kenya, who had imposed heavy taxes on them. So the Menelik who was conquering Ethiopia by then imposed heavy taxes. So they escaped from Menelik wars, and the Menelik actually had imposed heavy taxes on the Borana. So today, the Borana occupy the area north of the Tana River. So the area which they occupy today is north of Tana River. So that is where they occupy presently. So if you go to the northern part of Tana River, you'll find these people we refer to as the Borana. So quickly about the Borana, number one, they speak the Oromo language. Number two, the area of origin is southern Ethiopia. Number three, the main reason why they came from southern Ethiopia, they were escaping the Menelik wars of conquest in 1897, and the Menelik had imposed upon them heavy taxes. And lastly, today they occupy the north of Tana River. So that for today marks the end of our lesson. We shall meet in the next lesson, and we shall discuss into detail about other language groups and the migration of other communities into Kenya. Keep safe and goodbye.